Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today, I have an assortment of just absolutely horrific experiences. And when I say horrific, I mean horrific. Also, I'm going to jump into a reptilian case file. We have 2 left after this, 32, 33, 34. I think this week, we're supposed to have a heat wave in upstate New York. And I really am not going to even brave going outside Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because it's supposed to be 100 plus the humidity. So I think what I'll do is I will compile the case file, the reptilian case file, put it into one just really long upload, and that way all the case files are in one video. They're very interesting. They are all documented. Jonathan Lear, Walter Cronkite, and more. Bill Cooper, just a lot of really interesting stuff. So I will put that in one large upload. Also, I think Friday the heat wave is supposed to break, so I might take the kayak out and go for a little jaunt. I ordered the camera holder so I can put it on the kayak and I can have it facing me or facing where I'm going. I'm looking forward to doing videos on there. It's going to be way too hot to do any hiking, especially up where Tom Mezek disappeared. And usually on the hot days, I've noticed, because I've gone up there through the past, I don't catch much of anything. It's just very loud, a lot of animal sounds, and very limited kind of fear. But who knows? I don't know how the week is going to progress. I'm just kind of planning it. I don't know. Maybe Wednesday I decide, hey, I can't stand being around the house. I'm going to go hiking. Anyway, let's jump into the encounter. But before we do that, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's upload, shall we? All right, guys, today's first encounter, I shared this on Saturday Nightmares live from New York. I know a lot of you guys don't tune into it, and I do share some really terrifying experiences there. So I figure, hey, let's share a couple of really good ones today. In July of 2018, I was living on my parents' farm in rural Kentucky. Being an upperclassman in high school, I was glad to have the summer respite that provided a much-needed distraction from my grueling studies. The farm is small, roughly 20 or so acres of crop-laden land. We grew corn, green beans, several types of sweet pepper, and even watermelon once in a while. My mom loved to sit by the raised beds and grow tulip, petunia, and orchid or two. I would help by moving large bags of seed from point A to point B in the front loader of my tractor. My dad taught me at an early age on how to ride, mow, and carry items with the tractor, so by the time of this encounter, I was able to maneuver the thing with ease that only comes with experience. Another important piece of information relating to the encounter is that we have a large hill that rests perpendicular to our country house. The hill is beautiful and wild, flourishing with innumerable species of insect, mammal, and other critters. On the day in question, I had to do my least favorite chore before doing things on the tractor, which was cleaning the chicken coop. It was an unpleasant experience, and I hated the smell of moldy pine shavings, but I got it done. Now it was time for the fun things, also known as tasks I could perform on the tractor. I went to the shed where we stored our equipment, opened the sliding door, and beheld the magnificent red Kubota. It's a small tractor, but it's perfect size for what we need on the farm. I checked the diesel level, topped off the tank, and hopped onto the seat and started it up. The engine roared to life, and I got to work. The first thing I did was move 5 bags of chicken feed from my dad's truck to the storage area for chicken supply. I quickly finished that task and looked back at my list for the next assignment, which was now to mow the hill that I mentioned above. I needed to mow it so some people could come to the property and convert the piles of cut grass into usable hay bales. So with profit from the hay bales in mind, I eagerly aligned the tractor up with a portion of the hill, lowered the brush cutter extension to an adequate level, and began mowing. Maybe 20 minutes in, I had mowed several strips back and forth along the hill, with sweat dripping from my brow. I braved the summer heat and proceeded to make the stripe along the tree line. For no apparent reason, a blur of dark gray fur burst from the trees and seemed to glide across the field into the trees that were on the opposite side of the hill. I don't think I would have seen it had it not made such a commotion as it initially exited the forest. Thinking it was a coyote or something of the sort, I stopped the tractor and grabbed my phone and texted my dad, who was on the opposite side of the farm cutting down some dead trees that had fallen from a recent July storm. "Spotted a coyote or something on the hill, stay alert," I typed. We took coyotes seriously since our chickens commonly roam free in this large area designated for them. They could be easily harmed or killed by a large enough predator. With that in mind, I resumed my mowing and eventually forgot about the whole thing entirely. However, while I was mowing through a particularly thick patch of grass, this furry creature ran out of the woods to my right, and this time it purposely avoided the brush-cutting blades as it jumped onto the back of my tractor and stood still for a moment. That's when I was able to get a good look at it. It vaguely resembled a coyote or a wolf, but its limbs and paws were completely wrong. The paws, in fact, were not paws at all. They were fur-covered hands. Its arms and legs were too muscly to be those of an ordinary canine. Even in the daylight, its eyes had this eerie, unsettling, intelligent glow to them, like the thing was calculating every possible move. Its face resembled that of a canine, but the way its skin drooped and was detached in some places made its face look mangled. The creature just looked utterly wrong from its head to its misshapen toes. The creature tried to climb up to where I was, and after its first failed attempt, my brain finally began to work and went into fight or flight mode, and I chose fight. I swerved the tractor from side to side, eventually flinging the thing off. Then I sped up and hit it with the side of the front loader. I thought that I had killed it, but it only looked mildly hurt as it hightailed it back into the woods. After the experience, I finished a couple more strips before calling it a day. I was too overwhelmed to safely operate the tractor, so I did the smart thing and took it back to the shed. I arrived at a grisly sight. Before me lied all our chickens. Their bodies, eviscerated gore, lie about in the chicken enclosure. Then I saw it standing in the enclosure was the creature that had just tried to attack me. It was ripping apart a chicken as I watched. However, it was not eating anything, as if it was trying to send a message, like, "This is what will happen to you if we cross paths again." When it finished this massacre, the creature hopped out of the enclosure, looked at me with primal hatred, and loped back into the woods. It was the last time I saw it, but it was not the last time it would come to our farm. One night my dad and I were sitting on the front porch of the house, an area that faced the hill. We're talking about harvest and insects that ate crops when all of a sudden a blood-curdling screech came from the direction of the hill. My dad and I both shot up out of the chairs. "You heard that, right?" my dad asked with a panicked tone. "Yeah, I heard it," I responded, confirming his fears. Now, my dad is a pretty tough guy, and I'd like to think that I am well-weathered myself. We've both been to hell and back, but that noise that came from those woods, it still makes me shiver to this day. My dad and I do not speak of that noise for fear that whatever made the sound may come back up close and personal next time. Now, I'm not sure whether that screech came from the creature I encountered on that hill, but I'd like to think so. I don't know of any animal on earth that could make that sound. Thank you for letting me share. Stay safe in the woods. At the end of that experience, they kind of ask, what does anyone think it is? I mean, I already know, and I'm sure many of you already know that it sounds exactly like a Dogman. A subscriber commented in the comment section of the live last night, a juvenile Dogman. And that makes a lot more sense than being a full-grown or adult Dogman. That kind of ballsy move, jumping on the back of the tractor, having kind of like a revenge on the chickens, and looking at the person with this kind of hate in its eyes. Any encounter that I've ever had that had been a juvenile Dogman, they do demonstrate that kind of teenage angst, I guess, just kind of feeling their power, and sowing their oats like a human would, or, anything else that is that intelligent. So just a good thought on that subscriber. So, and I did catch it during the live. So this next encounter really was one that really freaked me out. I actually thought about this encounter a lot after I shared it on the live. I also shared it with my dad while he and I were walking along the river walk down by the Hudson, and just told him how, unbelievably crazy this experience is. So let's get into it. My experience happened July of 2011. I was 21 years old. My aunt and uncle on my dad's side of the family came out from the Midwest to visit my family. We live in the Pacific Northwest. One of the highlights of the trip was that my uncle, who is my dad's sister's husband, not really related by blood, but still a cool guy, wanted to experience some deep sea halibut fishing on the Oregon coast, which my dad had arranged via a charter. And lucky enough for me, I had the privilege of being able to go on this fishing trip with my uncle and dad. A little information about me before we continue is that despite me being in a wheelchair and having to use it all the time, I always love activities such as fishing, hiking, traveling, and camping. Staying still is not an option for me. However, the day before we were set to go out on our charter, it was canceled due to bad weather. While we were all disappointed at this setback, and that's to put it lightly, my dad and uncle and I were determined to do a little bit of fishing. We decided on a place called Devil's Lake, located near where we were living. Anyway, the day after the charter was canceled, my dad and I loaded into my uncle's truck, and we left early in dawn to do our fishing. When we got to the lake, it was something out of a fisherman's dream, calm and pristine, and not another soul in sight. There was a rather precocious fishing dock, one that seemed to float on the water and had no guardrails or anything of that nature. That's where we decided to set up shop. Once my poles were baited and my line cast into the water, my dad and uncle went back to the truck to grab their chairs and a cooler so they could have something to relax with and enjoy whatever snacks and drinks they brought along. All the fishing gear was already on the dock, so they didn't need to worry about that. I didn't think anything of being left alone on the dock as my uncle and dad went to the truck, because all I had to do was look behind me and they'd be there. Frankly, my attention was drawn to the skies of all things. Birds of prey have always been a fascination for me. I looked above to see if any were in the sky. I've always admired how hawk and osprey seem to be expert fishermen on many of the excursions I have been on. Bald eagles had said to be in Oregon, though they were rare, and yet places like lakes around Oregon coast would be where you would find them, so I thought maybe I'd see one on this day. I'm focused, my thoughts on what happened next for me did not register until I was on the ground. Something had jerked me forward so hard that my wheelchair not only did a 180-degree turn, but spilled me onto the deck as well. A strong fish was not possible because if it was the case, it would have pulled me straight in from the front of my wheelchair and into the water. Instead, it felt as if something grabbed a hold of the right wheel and wrenched it so hard instead of falling straight into the water. I instead did a 180 turn and spilled out of the wheelchair and onto my stomach. This thought that flashed through my mind was further cemented when my wheelchair was pulled away from me and I heard it splash into the water. Thankfully, and I can't mean this sincerely enough, I had always made it a habit to cut the seatbelts out of my wheelchair whenever I had gotten a new one. Otherwise, this experience of mine would have probably ended up much different. Yet no sooner than when I heard my wheelchair hit the lake, I felt pressure close around one of my legs before I was pulled backward as I made a desperate attempt to crawl away, giving an involuntary shout as it yanked me back. There was nothing to grasp onto the dock to anchor myself, so in sheer panic I rolled myself onto my back, not thinking of what I'd encounter, and that's when I finally saw it. The face. That face was the only thing I could look at. It was so human in its oval, feminine appearance with sharp, tooth-like scales running vertically down the entire area of its flesh, like some sort of natural armor that was molded greenish blue-gray color that matched the water. Atop of the creature's head were these gentle, writhing, long, fleshy strands of muscle that to me looked like seaweed that cascaded behind its back. There was a nose with normal nostrils like a human butt, with small gill-like slits fluttering on the sides of where its nose was. Then there was those eyes, those amber golden eyes with a soft rectangular black pupil, that if I were to compare it now with any other animal, it would be that of an octopus. They were so full of rage and anger, yet also an unmistakable intelligence. Part of the way I've tried to cope with this experience of mine is by actually trying to humanize the attacker, despite it being far from, which is why I refer it as a her sometimes. It seemed as soon as my eyes locked with hers that triggered an enraged response as it leapt its body atop of mine. I couldn't guess why. It just didn't pull me into the water and finish me off. Maybe it thought it'd be easier to kill me on land before dragging me into the lake's depths. I remember as the being was on top of me, I felt a sharp stinging sensation envelop my back, which, although excruciatingly painful, was nothing compared to the terror that was trying to rip my face off as the creature bared its human-like teeth despite the obvious serrations on the ends of them. Instinctively, I brought my arms and hands into a defensive position before me managing to get my forearm underneath the creature's throat, while my other hand pressed against its forehead, which caused this creature to utter a frustrated, somewhat strangled hiss. I know I was screaming frantically at the top of my lungs, and I was crying, I know that for sure. There was no time to think, just act in the situation. And that's what I did until my uncle came and struck this creature in the face and head with his boot repeatedly. Almost simultaneously, my dad struck the creature in the back of its head with a fishing club, the weapon breaking on the fifth strike over its skull. It was here that the creature's grip loosened and I was pulled away, while at the same time hearing something heavy slide back into the water at what I assumed was this creature retreating. From there, I was carried back to my uncle's truck with my dad and uncle barking orders at each other. I remember being sat up in the back of my uncle's truck because apparently I had severe lacerations all over my back, and my dad sat beside me the entire ride, while my uncle drove to the nearest hospital while simultaneously calling an ambulance. The attack couldn't have lasted longer than a minute from the time this creature grabbed my wheelchair and tried pulling me into the lake to where my dad and uncle were fighting it off. At the hospital, my uncle and dad blamed the nature of my wounds on a mountain lion, which I went along with because none of us had the energy to try and explain what we saw. There were lacerations on my arms, back, and even my leg where the being had grabbed me that satisfied the doctors enough with our response. Eventually, when I brought the subject up with my uncle and dad, they told me the same thing. They heard the screaming and saw a large creature pressed atop of me. When they rushed in, they got a great look at it, and both of them described the same thing. It was about the size of an average human man at 6 feet, and those same sharp, toothy-looking scales adorned its entire body, along with that same molded blue-green-gray color. Its strong arms were wrapped behind my back as it was trying to take a bite out of my face and head. From the back of its neck to the base of its spine, there was apparently a single uniformed row of sturdy-looking spines resembling that of a crocodile. They said that the attacker had strong-looking legs as well that ended in large taloned feet that were planted on either side of me as the creature was trying to finish me off. Yet the freakiest element to this being, according to my uncle and dad, was the being's giant tail that was almost the length of its entire body, that they had said looked like the stereotypical mermaid tail except with a sharp-looking scale and the single uniform rows of spines on either side. Furthermore, when my dad recalled hitting the creature, he noted that no matter how hard he hit this thing, no blood or bruising appeared, as if this animal's hide was natural armor, which I would not argue. A decade has now passed since this incident, and I don't think I'm worse for wear because, well, I've had plenty of time to cope with what happened, mostly by researching what happened to me and trying to make sense of it. Interestingly enough, I have found there are reports of a lake creature in Devil's Lake, but the description is said the beast is that of an octopus, not a mermaid-type creature. In fact, the only reference to mermaids in the Pacific Northwest that I found was an Inuit legend known as the Qualupelik, which is a dangerous sea creature that resembles a woman and preys on humans. I've always tried to look at things with a scientific mind, and I've done the same thing with this creature I encountered. Perhaps it is a different branch of evolution from us humans, forced to be as brutal as the ocean environment it lives in order to survive. Thank you for allowing me to share the experience. All right. While narrating that experience last night, I couldn't help but think at how the creature targeted this young man. And don't get me wrong, I'm not calling this young man weak at all, because obviously he's not. He fought for his life and won, won with his life. But it's almost like this creature targeted the weakest person on the dock. Even though the dad and uncle weren't there, he was more vulnerable, he could see that, or the creature could see that he was confined and took full advantage of that situation, which to me only shows a certain type of intelligence, that predatory intelligence, much more dangerous and thought out than a bear or a mountain lion, bobcat, whatever predator, which is just, right up there with Dogman, maybe even smarter. To me, maybe even smarter. I know that I've heard of different alien creatures, obviously through the reptilian things underground. But I've also heard that reptilian-like creatures live underwater in kind of these sea caves. They have to swim into this water and then, go to this cave. The water is not, the cave isn't full of water, and that's where they live and hide from humanity. So, it makes sense, but God, that's just an absolutely terrifying experience. And I'm so happy that young man fought so valiantly for his life, fucking awesome. Today's third experience is right up there with the one we just heard. This experience took place back in 2013. I was 16 years old at the time. My granddad had a small cattle farm in northeast Arkansas. Had around 70 to 100 head at the time. Granddad was a very rigid man, never seen him scared or shed a tear even when my grandma passed away. Our property is mainly pasture with some patches of thick wood and a creek that runs through the middle. November, my favorite time of year, as the first weekend of November was the first gun hunt for deer season. My friend and I, Jackson, stayed over at my granddad's every year for the weekend so we could hunt. The first morning of the season started out as normal as the years had passed before. We both woke up on Granddad's sectional at 4:30 in the morning, still groggy and tired as we stayed up till 2 a.m., pumped for the next morning. We grabbed our guns and gear and headed out the door. It was a cold, stale morning, very calm and quiet. We took off down the driveway, walking toward the gate to the pasture where our hunting stand was. It was about a 1.5 mile walk. All we had to light our way was a couple of headlamps my granddad got us for Christmas the year before. We made it to our hunting spot and set up as we've done many times before. At this time, it was around 5:45. We're waiting for the shooting light. The deer stand set up along a pasture against the creek and woods. Deer would often walk out of the creek into the pasture in front of us. Being bored, restless 16-year-olds, we both started playing Flappy Bird. As we're sitting there waiting for daylight, we hear leaves start to rustle. My friend whispers, "There's moving early this morning." We shut our phones off and let our eyes adjust to the dark again. That's when I caught something on the edge of the creek slowly walking out. At this point, I was just waiting for the deer to walk out and start grazing in the pasture in front of us. Out of nowhere, this deer lets out a small growl or howl. We froze. We've heard coyote and bobcat, but this was different. We stared at this creature that was against the tree line. It was dead still. My friend whispers to me, "That's not a deer. What the hell is that, man?" I said, "I'm not sure. I think it's a big stray dog or something, but it sounds sick." As we are staring at this unknown creature in the dark, my friend drops his phone onto the base of the deer stand, and the animal stands up bipedally. My friend absolutely freaks out and ripped off his headlamp and pointed it at the animal. There, standing in the spot we were just staring at, stood a canine-like creature. To best describe it, it looked like a German shepherd standing bipedally. This thing is at least 7 feet tall as it towered over an old fence against the property line. This thing stood there for 3 to 4 seconds before dropping back onto all fours and darting into the woods, trying to get our eyes off of it. I looked at my friend and said, "Let's get the F out of here." We ran back to the house as fast as we could. When we got to the house, Granddad was sitting on the couch watching some TV and drinking coffee. He said, "You boys are back early. Give up already?" We proceeded to tell him everything that happened, and he kind of just laughed at us. "You boys have a wild imagination. We played in those woods when I was a kid, and the scariest thing we ever saw was each other." A terrible grandpa joke. Finally, we calmed down and tried to talk about what we had seen with each other. That's when Granddad's house phone rang. It was my dad, who always checks cows first thing in the morning. I don't know what my dad said to my granddad on the phone, but Granddad stood up with the blankest face and ran up to his bedroom and grabbed his old SKS rifle he kept out to shoot coyote and other pests, and came back to the front room and told me and my friend, "Stay here, watch TV until I get back." Myself and Jackson stared at each other. We sat around the kitchen table for a couple of hours till Granddad came back to the house, followed by my dad. Both of their faces looked like they had seen a ghost or something. Dad tells me that Jackson and I are not allowed to hunt the rest of the weekend, and that he'd need to call his mom and get out of here as quick as possible. I asked my dad and Granddad what's going on, and Granddad said the door to the barn was open and 12 calves that were there were ripped apart or missing. Granddad called the local sheriff to report it. I remember standing in front of the barn with 3 cops there. Granddad wouldn't let me go in and look, as if I was not an interested 16-year-old boy. Everyone seemed so clueless and frightened. After the police left, my dad and Granddad cleaned out the barn and disposed of the carcasses. The rest of that Saturday went on as normal as it could, I guess. The night at supper, Grandpa asked me, "Son, when you said you saw this creature this morning, you were not pulling my leg, were you?" I said, "No, Granddad, I swear on everything." He sat there with a blank look on his face. We finished dinner and headed off to bed. I fell asleep to listening to George Lopez on TV and woke up around 7 the next morning to a neighbor knocking on the door. Turns out he had some cattle ripped apart in his pasture last night and wanted to get rid of whatever was out there doing it. They called the Fish and Game, and they came out and did an investigation and looked around and said, "We got this handled." We were pretty sure it was a bear that traveled this far south, as we have no bear in our area that I know of. I remember going home from Grandpa's house with all of this running through my head, trying to figure out exactly what we saw and everything that happened. A few days went by and nothing out of the ordinary happened. Grandpa wouldn't talk to me hardly about any of this. So I'm not exactly sure what happened after all that. I know a few times a year there are reports of an animal sighting matching exactly what me and my friend saw. Now it's 2024. As a full-grown man, I'm pretty sure what we saw that day was definitely not a bear, but more or less a dogman. Thank you for letting me share. This next encounter is going to ease us into the Reptilian case files. It fits so perfectly. I'm a member of the United States Army, and I have a personal experience to share that comes from my deployment to Afghanistan. Due to the nature of my service, I cannot and will not share anything that will breach any level of OSEC or InfoSec in any way, shape, form, to reveal any details that will or can be construed as such to compromise any operations myself or other members of the United States military conduct on a daily basis. That being said, here's my experience. I'm a United States Army Infantry Squad Leader, a non-commissioned officer with 10 years of service. And I have 12 soldiers under my command in my squad, 10 soldiers and 2 non-commissioned officer team leaders. Soldiers are ranked E3 to 4, with 18 months of experience at the very least. My team leaders having 4 to 5 years of experience, respectively. All of us have at least one combat deployment together, with the senior of my soldiers having 2. All of us has had enough experience in our service that we are absolutely confident in our abilities and skill as infantry soldiers and know what to do and how to do it, given any and all combat situations. So, when we were given a mission as a squad separate from our platoon, we did not really give any thought to the nature of the orders, or the fact we would be significant distance from our platoon or any ground assistant whatsoever, separate from the CAS or artillery we could call in and other assets available. I received the mission, issued the warno, made a plan, initiated movement, gathered recon, and completed the plan. I issued the OPROD, and we Oscar mic'd. All the making and appearance of a usual and routine mission, something we did daily and completed daily, and we reached the objective, and it all went to what I can only describe as a hellish given form. We had vehicles that were specifically designed for being explosive resistant and armored enough to give us an edge in surviving a multitude of situations we would come across. It was dark and we had night vision goggles on, approaching a small village, 7 buildings under cover of darkness, being as quiet as possible, ready for anything. We entered and cleared a house after house and found bodies, lots of bodies. So many it was hard to enter any dwelling without stepping on them. And I have never in my 10 years seen anything as disturbing or as shocking as the condition the bodies were in. And the sheer number was numbing to behold. Some looked if they had been torn apart, ripped in half. It's no mistake, ripped and torn by sheer brutal strength. Some looked crushed as if a ton or more of weight had slammed onto them, like pulped. I have run over other human beings with a 6-ton vehicle, and I know what crushed looks like when I see it. Others looked as I would expect if I were to eat a piece of raw meat with my teeth, if I had teeth like a shark or some sort of carnivore, like something had taken large chunks out and kept going. The rest looked like what you'd imagine some mythical monster or something with claws and teeth or sharp anything would have gone through them, like so much defenseless flesh all over. We finally reached the end of the village and met something I can only describe as the closest to demonic as human language can make, and it was terrifying. Thinking about it as I type this gives me chills, makes my heart feel like it's going to burst from my chest, and that in any moment the thing will burst from somewhere and do unspeakable things to me before killing me, ripping me apart like a rag doll. I still have nightmares about it. First vehicle opened up on it with a 50 cal APT. He was going cyclic. Next thing I know, I see a 6-ton armored vehicle that can take up to 80 pounds of explosive force and come rolling back, literally flying back, not roll, not flip, fly. It landed in the middle of a friggin' village in pieces. 6 damn tons of armor flew 700 meters. My vehicle was next, and I have never cycled an automatic grenade launcher so fast in my whole career. I was linking belt after belt after belt, and I was unjamming it as fast as I could, and as fast as it would jam. I'm screaming my head off on the radio at the same time they're trying to get hold of the other vehicle. Called in CAS and artillery and ordered my squad to shoot this thing with every weapon we had, even though I know for a fact that we were already doing it. And I am still screaming. I can hear screaming and gunfire. It sounds like millions of voices screaming with us, with explosions and tearing metal. Absolute chaos and control here. And I am screaming, crying, praying, but then the craziest thing I'd ever seen happened. Everything went almost silent. No sound, no voices, no gunfire, no explosions, nothing. The world went mute. And after that, everything slowly came back. My alpha team leader, who climbed up to me, had to slap me hard to snap me out of it, whatever hellish zone I was in. My best guess is shock, but unlike anything I'd ever heard, experienced, or watched, it took hours for me to get it together and start attempting to control my situation, get communications with LT, and come to grips. First priority was the first vehicle. We couldn't raise them on the comms, so I sent 2 to go see if they were still alive and needed medical attention. Then I realized we didn't get a BDA on the thing we just unloaded on. I directed my driver to get closer to the area and noticed something right off the bat. There was damage everywhere except for one spot, and that spot was untouched, pristine, like it had never been subject to all the firepower we had just described. Not a single impact. There was no sign of this thing or where it went. Hell, not even a footprint. I had been deployed 7 times in 10 years, and I have never seen anyone or anything walk away from that much firepower, ever. I know for a fact that no human on this earth could. My 5 soldiers in the first vehicle lived miraculously due to the cab being reinforced, but suffered severe blunt force trauma from the impact. Enough that all 5 in the vehicle were immediately given medical discharge at 100% disability a few months later. My other soldiers are all receiving the best psychological care possible. I'm undergoing psychological evaluation as well due to the report I gave to my command. The treatment given to me and my squad leader is no surprise. However, the way my report of the incident was handled and what happened after that is very confusing and very frustrating. No more about this has been mentioned and acknowledged again. I don't care if someone believes me or not, as every time I am asked about it and answer, I am met with reactions of disbelief, pity, sympathy for my damaged mental state. I'm even attempting to be cleared to continue my service, and am forced to lie to my counselors and therapists about my progress in recovering from my experiences. I'm still haunted by this incident, and it still gives me a racing heart just thinking about it. I am hoping that people will hear this and let me remain anonymous. Thank you for all you do. And with that, let's jump into Reptilian case file number 32. Case file 32. From an email from confidential source J. In reference to case file 26, J made the following comments. Regarding the first experience on that link with Michael Lindman was relating, I know the woman personally. Her name is D. There is much, much more to her story than good old Michael hinted at. That was in the period before Michael was turned by security services. Truth be told, much of the info he had obtained from Bill Hamilton and some of the unnamed personnel heavily involved in investigations of underground facilities in the Antelope Valley. You can literally feel the negative energy there in Antelope Valley and further east near Ridgecrest where D used to live. China Lake is near Ridgecrest, and that place is positively evil. What Lindman did not tell you about D was that her family bloodline was followed by the military. They told her that prior to the development of verbal communication, humans communicated by telepathy, which was possibly because of a particular hormone secreted in the brain. A good bet that the reptilian geneticists bred this capability right out of the humans. The gland that secretes this hormone is atrophied in most families except for D's. So the Navy would kidnap her while she was still a young girl and take her to an underground facility at China Lake and put her through trauma-based programming. Then the next week, the Air Force would kidnap her and take her to another underground facility beneath George Air Force Base in Victorville, California, in the high desert. She said it was a case of the right hand not knowing what the left hand was doing, or at least that was the impression they were trying to give her. D had been used by the military for remote viewing operations. She is the real thing. I introduced her to another former military remote viewer I know, and they compared notes on underground facilities where friends of mine have been taken to. Without knowing anything about these abductions described down there, both D and the other viewer described numerous details of the underground facility. I know what the command and control center looks like. There were military personnel, reptilian and military reptilian shapeshifters down there. Years ago, D was taken underground beneath China Lake and shown the geneticist lab and a holding facility for the genetically altered mutants. She described ghastly creatures of every shape and size. There were also captive humans down there. She was taken down there to intimidate her and show her what would happen to her if she did not cooperate. Her own son was murdered by a local law enforcement officer, and details and investigation covered up. I lost track of her the last time I heard she moved out of high desert. I would love to meet this gal again. Yes, D was the one who witnessed the reptilian slashing open the chest of a gray. She was then laid on a table and assaulted by a reptilian. She hates that particular species of reptilian. They have materialized inside of her car while she was driving. The intimidate height of some of these reptilians, 4.5. She also, the one who saw the rep playing around with her jewelry box. Lindman says there's an argument between the gray crew leader and the reptilian, but my info was that when the reptilian walked onto the ramp into the ship, all the grays became extremely frightened and seemed to stand at attention. I think she likened it to the admiral coming aboard. Such was the fear that was amongst the grays by this reptilian. On another occasion, she was taken to a reptilian underground base, same species, beneath Death Valley. She was brought before the Ancient One, my nickname for the reptilian chieftain she had met. This entity stood taller than any of the others of the species and actually wore an Egyptian headdress with a cobra snake motif in the front. I saw a sketch she had drawn. Fascinating. It proceeded to transmit into Dee's mind the official version of the species' history here on Earth, how they survived the cataclysm of the dinosaurs by living underground, became intelligent, were alternately worshipped by humans as gods, and reviled by humans as monsters, etc., etc., etc. During her visit, she saw a clutch of reptilian eggs. She said she wanted to take an axe to them. All right, guys, that is something I am actually going to do, is redo and have them all in one big video. Because case file 26 was like so far back, seven case files ago. The last two are actually really long, but really amazing. This one is from Bruce Fleming, and it is a communication between him and David Icke, talking about deep underground military bases. And then the final one is, wow, really amazing. So I'm looking forward to the last two, but I do believe that reptilian case file video, it'll fall under the cracks. I know it will. I'll probably put 4 hours into recording the thing, and it'll just, slip through the cracks. But the amount of information in that video is going to be just amazing. And it sucks that it will fall through the cracks. But you know what? I'm not doing it for any other reason for you guys to watch it. And if the world doesn't see it, I hope that it gets seen, but I don't know. You know what I mean? It sucks that these videos that are very full of information and could help people fall through the cracks. Yet a creepypasta video gets 1 million freaking views talking about dead dog or whatever, fucking computer dog. You know what I mean? It just sucks because fact is so much more scarier. Anyway, guys, thank you for supporting the channel. It is your support, after all, that keeps this channel growing and going. And honestly, what gives people a chance, and myself a chance, to share theories and experiences judgment-free, just treated with the respect that we all deserve. Thank you. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with the people you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for answers, and God bless.